Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast, celebrates 10 years of broadcasting. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, and if you don't know that by now, where have you been? And it's a pertinent question because we're now in celebratory mood here at Musical Talk because we've just passed our 10th anniversary and next week is our 500th episode. It's really quite remarkable to consider. As I've said before, we've been on for a decade and decade is how we all feel. But there's plenty of life in us yet, so we're not going anywhere for the time being. The celebrations start in earnest next week with, as I said, our 500th episode, when you'll be able to hear show creators Nick Hudson and Andy Edwards having a conversation about the heady days of 2006, when, Wicked was still fresh in London, and the world lived in happiness because no one had thought about writing Love Never Dies. How things have changed. Anyway, it struck me that, as is traditional, Musical Talk will be looking back at itself and picking out some of its highlights and talking about its history over the next few weeks. But whilst history is a wonderful place, and after all it does get bigger every day, it's also worthwhile thinking about the future. So, for this week's episode 499, Maths fans, I thought we would look forward to some of the episodes that we're going to be presenting here on Musical Talk in the forthcoming year, in order to whet your appetite. So, what you're going to be hearing today are short extracts of interviews and discussions which I've recorded for forthcoming episodes of Musical Talk. Some are quite recent, and some we have dragged out of the Musical Talk archive, where they've been languishing for far too long, dusted them down, so that we can play them in the next few months. So let's start with a couple of those. I'm genuinely delighted to say that the next two extracts come from interviews which I conducted some years ago and which have only recently been rediscovered in our archive. They have never been played before. So in just a minute we'll hear from Edward Petherbridge, an actor I have always admired ever since he played Lord Peter Wimsey on BBC television in the 1980s, but who is in his own way a stalwart of musical theatre. He's been in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, The Fantastics and, briefly, Blitz. But in the extract you'll hear, he'll be talking about his earliest theatrical roots and the influence of British pantomime on his early years. But before that, we'll hear just a few minutes of a live interview that I conducted with the now late Sandy Wilson, one of the great British composers, and most famous of course as the writer of The Boyfriend, which I recorded in 2009 in front of a live audience of writers of musical theatre. So let's hear those now with my introduction to the late, great Sandy Wilson. Musical Talk. So please, ladies and gentlemen, do join me in welcoming one of Britain's genuinely most versatile composers, person who's involved in musical theatre, Sandy Wilson.
It says here, it says here that I am to talk to you about my career. It also describes me as being most venerable, which makes me feel as I ought to be at least 95 with a long white beard. Well, I'm not yet. My career does indeed go back a very long way, well over 60 years as a matter of fact, and began very soon after I left Oxford. I was up at Oxford in 46 to 47. Anyway, my career began very soon after I left Oxford, where I spent most of my time. I was supposed to be reading English literature, but I spent most of my time acting and writing reviews. Now, I'd just like to stop for a moment there and talk about review, because it's a form of theatre which seems to have disappeared almost entirely and completely, as far as I can tell. And I think it's a pity. I'd just like to tell you a bit about review. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about, but maybe others don't. Review became popular during the First World War, the Great War, and flourished throughout the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and faded out in the 50s, which I think is a pity because it was a very rewarding form of theatre. It was rewarding for the audience because a review consisted of song, dance, sketches, comedy, humour, satire, you name it, everything. In fact, it was rather like one of those gourmet menus in which each course was different from the one before, and ended up by being a banquet, a wonderful form of entertainment, good value for your money. It was also very rewarding for the company, for the cast, because they had to do everything. They had to sing, they had to dance, they had to act, they had to change character in a matter of minutes. Very good training for the company, and wonderful training for writers, because you had to write everything. You had to write lyrics, music, if you were a composer, sketches, monologues, blackouts, you name it. Wonderful training. And I grew up in London during the 30s, and there were always 2 or 3 revues running in London at that time, and I saw quite a few of them. They would range from huge shows by Charles Cochrane, you may have heard of, the Cochrane Revues, which were very big shows with a cast of about 50, with chorus girls and ballet dancers and Mr. Cochrane's young ladies, and 3 or 4 big stars, huge shows, ranging right down to what was called Intimate Revue, which was on a much smaller scale with a cast of about as many as we are here now, or even less. And that would be at the smaller theatres in London, like the Fortune, the Ambassadors, the Criterion. There was even a theatre called the Little, which was little because it was small. And it was on the Embankment. Unfortunately, it went in the Blitz. And the reviews there were especially good. They were written by a man called Herbert Fardian, who was a brilliant lyric writer and sketch writer. And the star of those reviews was a lady called Hermione Baddeley, who was not only a brilliant actress, she could sing, she could dance, she was terribly funny. Very, extremely outrageously funny. Along from there, in Villiers Street, there was the Gate Theatre Club, which, because it was a club, it was not subject to censorship, which of course existed in those days. So they put on plays that had been banned, but they also put on reviews which were much more daring than the average review, because they had no censorship, particularly politically, and they would have sketches about the royal family, that sort of thing. And the star of those shows was another Hermione Gingold. She was even more outrageous and a fantastic character, and she could change her character in a matter of moments, from one looking beautiful to looking quite extraordinary. So those are the 2 stars. And those reviews at the Gate Theatre, one came to the Ambassadors in 1939, which I saw. And also another thing about reviews was they did produce good songs. They obviously had music, and they had some very good songs in them too, which have lasted. For example, I saw a review called Spread It Abroad in 1936, and the hit number of that was These Foolish Things, which became a standard and still is. Then in 1940 I saw a review at the Comedy called New Faces, and the hit number of that was A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, sung by Judy Campbell. Wonderful number. And in the Gate Review there was a beautiful song, which some of you may have heard, called Transatlantic Lullaby by Jeffrey Wright. And so growing up and seeing these shows, I was very much influenced by them. It was, to me, a superb form of entertainment, both for writing and composing. And I started, I may say I didn't have any musical training at all. I'll tell you what my musical training was. Now we're on to me. Growing up in the 30s in London, I listened to music on the radio, on the gramophone, and in the cinema. And I listened to masters, Cole Porter, Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, Richard Rodgers. That was our pop music. And I began to think of tunes in my head, thinking of my own songs. In fact, when I was only about 10 or 11, I dreamed one day I would write a musical comedy that would be a hit in the West End and then go to New York and be a hit on Broadway. I haven't the faintest idea what it was going to be about. I just imagined rows and rows of chorus girls in beautiful costumes strolling up and down staircases singing all my songs, which is what you used to see in the cinema in those days.
Musical talk. Well, Edward, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to me. Your new book is out. This is the story of your life. And your theatrical career in particular, but it does start beautifully, if I may say. With your
You may say that.
well, it proceeds beautifully as well.
That's a good beginning, anyway. I mean, on your part.
Oh well, I'm very happy to have started the correct way. But your book is truly evocative at the beginning, and absolutely sums up the moment when you became stage struck, I think.
Yes.
Which was in a pantomime, so much more full-blooded, I think, in the past than perhaps they are today. Can you tell me about Humpty Dumpty?
Humpty Dumpty, when I was 7 in 1902.
Stop.
Yes, the Bradford Alhambra, which Northerners and peripatetic people will know, is a rather splendidly big music hall. It was built as after the turn of the century. It was built in this black town of Bradford, as it used to be, soot-ridden, with white terracotta cladding on its domes. Alhambra. It looks nothing like the Alhambra, of course. We used to call it the Alhambra, not the Alhambra, but the Alhambra. And of course, I thought the Alhambra in Spain was something quite different, and of course it is.
Well, in real terms, it is. Yes.
It is.
Figuratively, at least.
Yes, it is. Anyway, in my day, I was seeing my first pantomime in the war, by which time the theatre was painted a kind of dirty mud chocolate brown.
For the blackout, presumably.
For the blackout, to keep it from being an icon to the Hun. And I was very excited to be taken to my first pantomime. They waited till I was 7 to do it. And I remember the precise... I could take you to the... If they haven't changed the seats, I could probably take you to the precise seat. I was just sitting behind the limelight man and was fascinated. That was part of the show, because he was doing all his coloured slides and everything and trimming his carbon... whatever they call them. It was a real limelight. It was an arc light in that there was a white arc of light going across 2 carbon terminals. It was the proper stuff. Yes, it was. Yes. A lot of
good mechanical.
Yeah, a lot of clunk click and yeah. And so down below there was this golden world, which one realised was quite artificial, of course. It was from that gallery seat, which was not particularly... Well, it was quite near the front. It was about the 3rd row. It was certainly the best view of Bradford I'd ever had. Whether it was the best...
population, you mean?
Scenically, in every way. Even though it may not have been the best view of the pantomime, one had a very good view of the stage cloth. But, and of course, the Tiller girls who... Well, was it the Tiller girls? The girls who did the flying ballet.
On the Kirby ones.
Kirby's.
Yeah.
They didn't throw their bunches of violets up to us. They threw them down to the stalls, or at a pinch, as they flew out. You know, used to fly right out into the auditorium.
Oh, beyond the auditorium, beyond the stage.
Yes.
Splendid.
This is thrilling.
Well, people are still thrilled by that today. We'll probably touch on later on in your conversation.
Yeah. So, but Norman Evans was the thing.
And he's one of the great 20th century names.
Yes, I feel a little bit ambiguous about him now, because I've, since those days, seen some of his films. In fact, I saw one of his films, ages ago, in one of those nostalgia programs that we had in black and white, way back before we had a black and white, before we had a coloured set, before there were coloured sets, possibly. Next week, we'll be reviewing the work of Norman Evans. And I thought, dare I look? He'd become such a legend to me.
Iconic.
He's over the garden wall sketch, you know.
I mean, Liz Dawson owes a great deal to the Norman Evans persona in some sense.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Anyway, I need to worry, because I was rather impressed by the clip of him doing Over the Garden Wall. And it seemed to have a sort of kind of realism about it, as well as all these rather corny jokes. But unfortunately he did do a lot of rather rubbishy films that they seem to have I can only describe it as comedians messing about, and very, very undisciplined and really, really disappointing, because his stage act was so well timed and well honed and earthy, of course, and the smell of carbolic and the real Bradford, even though he was wearing this exaggerated costume. There was something pre-royal court about it, really.
But do you think that's because he was playing a person, one of the people? That you describe him as a great Democrat in some senses, democratic theatre.
I don't know.
And in a film you don't have an audience.
Yes. He's certainly, in the fairy tale world of the pantomime, where the good ended happily and the bad unluckily, and riches came the way of the poor, and it's an apotheosis of everything that the Methodist Church had led me not to believe was possible. And then he brought this sort of breezy smell of carbolic and reality. These grapes are sour. A bunch of grapes. You can imagine the war. These grapes are sour. I'll be glad when I've had enough.
It's a great line anyway.
It's a great line.
But as well, he's all... we have to explain here, I think, for maybe some young listeners, that he's... I'm not going to say a drag act. He's a pantomime dame, so he's a man dressed as a woman, but convincingly. It's not fairly convincingly.
There was something...
as real, I suppose.
Well, if you'd seen some of the ladies who pegged their washing across our street, you wouldn't have think it was exaggerated at all.
Musical talk. There we are. That was Edward Petherbridge talking about his pantomime roots. And before that, of course, just a few minutes of the late Sandy Wilson. And you'll be able to hear those complete interviews with both of those incredible men in the coming year here on Musical Talk. Now, with Edward talking about pantomime, it reminds me that we are entering the pantomime season here in Britain. And only in the last week, as I record this, I have had the pleasure of talking to somebody I've wished to talk to for many years. His name is Andrew Pollard, and for my money, he's the best writer and performer of British pantomime in London, and possibly beyond. He's worked with the Greenwich Theatre now for 12 years and has performed in pantomimes for 11 of those. This year's pantomime is about to open and it's called Peter Pan, A New Adventure. And so I had great pleasure talking to Andrew about that show and also pantomime in general. So let's just hear a few minutes of that interview. Andrew Pollard on pantomime. Musical talk. Take us back to the experimental point about Peter Pan and the fact that in the Victorian era almost any fairy tale seems to have been able to be used. You look back at the old playbills and whatever, you see Humpty Dumpty. Even in my lifetime, I can't remember the last time I saw Babes in the Wood. That's disappeared.
Yeah.
Sinbad appeared in the 1980s for about 10-15 years and seems to have disappeared again. I rather liked Sinbad. I thought that was a good addition.
I like Sinbad, and I did a version for a theatre up in the north. I liked it, and I've been trying to persuade James to do it here. He's been slightly reluctant.
Really?
I don't know why. I know Stratford East are doing Sinbad this year, so I'm still going to kind of push away at that because I think it can be quite good.
I saw David Yip as Sinbad right. in about 1982, I suspect, yes, when he was still the Chinese detective on British television.
Yeah.
Throwing it back a bit.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that it's a great pity that actually there were huge numbers, and then through the 20th century it sort of solidified with a medium-sized group of regulars, Puss in Boots but still Ali Baba would turn up.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Ali Baba for yonks.
Yeah.
And then it really narrowed down. And then the only two I can think of that are now regularly, Sinbad came and sort of went again. And Peter Pan is the most recent one that's come into the world of pantomime.
Yeah.
I think it's I'm marvellous that things are being absorbed.
Yeah.
But great pity that, we'll never see a Humpty Dumpty panto again.
No,
No one knows what the plot would be there.
Well, fully enough, here at Greenwich, because if you're here long enough, the audience start to trust you, and the titles, up to a point, I think, you can play with the titles and you can be more adventurous because they just trust that they're going to come and see a good show with a good creative team and the way they like to see you do it.
Yes.
If they've liked it, they'll come back. So I think we have been lucky here where we have done more titles than maybe
Many.
a lot of places.
Well, you've done 10 years. This is your 11th year, isn't it, here?
It's 11th I've been in, it's 12th I've written. Yeah.
And I don't think you've repeated yet, or have you won?
No, we have repeated a couple of times. So we've done. What did we do? I'm sorry, I think
throwing a kettle drum down the staircase.
Sorry, yeah, something's
That's not
happening
your
out there, isn't it? We've done Jack and the Beanstalk twice now. Have we done Aladdin twice? Yes. So Aladdin was the very first one that I wrote here, but I wasn't. That was all my involvement, and then we did it once I'd started doing them. So that's been done twice as well. But yeah, not many repeats, and hence actually Peter Pan was my. I'd thought about that. James had often said he'd like to do Peter Pan if I didn't do it one year, if I didn't do Panto one year, because there isn't a Dame in it. Sometimes there is.
I want to talk about that, but yes.
Yeah. But, so I was asked to write a Panto for a charity thing a couple of years back, and every 2 years there's a group of interior designers in London, and they do a big charity Panto, and they book a West End theatre, and they do it for a week, and it's like just a very big amateur panto on a grand scale, and they spend no amount of money on it, and they get designers like Galliano and to do all the costumes. So they're
sumptuous to look at.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And that year it was NSPCC, it was the charity that they were doing it for, and they wanted to do Peter Pan. So I wrote this kind of version of Peter Pan, and it really worked. I really sort of liked it, and there's a couple of people who I trust who came to see it, who were kind of in the business of it, and they really liked it. And there'd been a couple of Peter Pans I'd seen panto-wise that I didn't think quite worked because they fell between two stools, and it was kind of a lot of the play version with panto in, and it didn't quite work for me. So anyway, I said to James, look, can we try this? And he's been brilliant, and he said, yeah. I mean, Peter Pan's a good seller anyway, a good title. So I've written a new story, and I am nervous about it. And there's been more kind of script changes than usual while we've been rehearsing, just trying to kind of get it right. So it's all the characters, or a lot of the characters you might love, with a different, just a different story.
Can I, however, just say that I'm actually delighted to hear that. I'll be absolutely honest with you. I enjoy the concept of Peter Pan very much more than I enjoy the story of Peter Pan, because actually, bless him, J.M. Barrie is a great writer. I'm not going to... The Admiral Crichton is a marvellous piece.
Which I've done. I played Admiral Crichton at the New Vic in Stoke, a few years back.
Were you Crichton?
Yeah.
I can see you doing that awfully well.
Well, thank you very much.
And only this last weekend I saw a well-remembered voice, which is one of his 1918 play about World War I loss.
Oh, wow, I don't know that one.
It's not been performed in London for something like 100 years.
Right.
So, I was very pleased to see it. It was very, very atmospheric and excellent. And it addresses the issue of seances and connection with the supernatural, which is presumably one of the reasons it was popular at the time and less popular since.
Yeah.
But it addresses, or it investigates the reality or otherwise of seances through a ghost, interestingly. Right. And the ghost debunks or doesn't debunk seances. That was interesting, using the supernatural to investigate the supernatural, if you like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I digress, I do. But Peter Pan is a little bit by numbers. You had the nursery scene where, bless, you had the I can't find my shadow, and can I put it on with soap, and what is a kiss, and Mr. Darling can't do his tie, and I can give you all this because I've seen it a million times.
Yeah.
And people almost revere the text too much because it is an author text, whereas Jack and the Beanstalk, as you know, is 1812 or something in its first recorded version, and it goes back well beyond that. So fairy tales are fair game. You can tweak and twiddle and work and warp and weft and whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whereas Peter Pan is a little bit Edwardian still, and I have a lot of time for that, but I don't always want to see the same thing. And it suffers from not having a dame, in my view. I've never seen a version of it with a dame. I know there have been versions of it with a dame, but they are quite rare. I was lucky enough to see Simon Callow playing Captain Hook.
Wow.
So that was... I had the privilege of speaking to him beforehand, and he was talking about watching Sir Donald Warfit do it. And I thought, I'm enjoying this conversation. It was taking a turn I wasn't expecting. So there was lots to commend, and it was beautiful, but and then, leaving the poison out. And I appreciate there are some things that are going to have to remain in it, Tinkerbell, etc. Blah blah blah. I assume.
Yeah.
And I don't in any way knock the Barry, but as I say, I think the problem is the text is almost too revered, and therefore people are too afraid to move very far from it, and therefore you see the same show line for line almost. Appreciate the copyright aspects and the Great Ormond Street and the perpetual copyright and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the idea that you can have fun with it. You've been talking about playing with other performers, playing with the audience. I want people to play with the text. And I'm hoping that's, to a degree, what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. Really. I mean, I've just basically taken the characters and done a different thing. So the main differences, I suppose, and actually, so it is a weird one this year because we start in modern day.
Oh, now.
Which panto-wise is.
Doesn't happen. They're in their own world, aren't they? But they're always faintly medieval.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I don't know. Some people might not consider this as a panto, but then some people don't consider Peter Pan anyway as a panto. So it is a bit of a departure, actually. But you've got to try these things, and it's great that Greenwich will let us do that. But what that enables you to do is to kind of twist it a little bit, and also that element of. The thing sometimes, I don't know what, I think it's just because brains, we know what panto is, and so, like you were saying, that kind of medieval look with modern day references and all that still seems to work, but for me that Victorian with modern day references of panto and starting in the Edwardian bedroom, it just never sits quite well. So now I've just kind of gone, well, that's not what's happening. Hook, I don't want to give it away too much, but anyway, Hook is back. He's back by a weird little machination, and so it means that he can enjoy the things that modern day has provided for him a little bit, and he can be a bit more kind of into a pop number or something because he's experienced modern day, and so we've kind of played with that. And I think there is an irreverence to it, actually. We are kind of going, look, this is Peter Pan, but we're just pulling it apart. So I hope people will see it in the same spirit. Some people
Peter
might...
Pandemonium.
Well, it is a bit, yeah. So I hope people will... I'm sure, I'm hoping they'll like it, but I have been a bit nervous and plot-wise, I just kind of hope it kind of works. But it's the same aesthetic as we've sort of built up here. It's the same team. So I think there's a lot of similarities.
Musical talk. There we are, that was Andrew Pollard, and I cannot wait to play you the 2 episodes about pantomime in general and Peter Pan, A New Adventure in particular, a lot of P's in that sentence, in the next few weeks. And you should seriously think about going along to see Andrew, because he is a magnificent pantomime dame as well as a pantomime writer. So if you want to see Peter Pan, A New Adventure, you can. It's on between Friday the 18th of November and runs through to Sunday the 8th of January 2017. It's on at the Greenwich Theatre, and their website is www.greenwichtheatre.org.uk. I am certainly going to be seeing that show, and I hope that you'll consider it too. Well, so far we've heard interviews with people who have been long established in the world of musical theatre. But one of the things we also like to do on the programme is talk to people who are up and coming. It's been my great pleasure over the years to speak to people like Dougal Irvine, Stuart Matthew Price, Luke Shepherd, Jake Brunger and Pippa Cleary, just to name 5, and there are plenty more. Well, I recently was able to sit down and talk to someone else who has impressed me already with his work. His name is Colm Molloy, and though you may not have heard of him yet, I'm absolutely certain that you will in the future. So let's just hear a little bit of a conversation I had with Colm about his earliest influences and how he got into writing musical theatre. Musical talk. Colm, it's a delight to talk to you again, but I'm going to say immediately off the bat, it's a privilege for me to be able to talk to you because we met in the audience of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Allegro recently at the Southwark Playhouse, and you immediately impressed me as someone who could tell what they were seeing and had some interesting things to say about it. So it's dawned on me very quickly that you were somebody worth talking to. So how would you describe yourself? Because you're a man of many talents.
I am a composer, lyricist primarily, but I've had experience in being an actor. I've also been a dancer, performer, deviser. I've had teachers call me a man of the theatre, so if that's my tag, I'm fine with being a man of the theatre.
Much better to be a man of the theatre than a man in the theatre, which it really diminishes that role down somewhat.
That's true.
But it is principally in your role as composer and lyricist, I think we're here to talk, as well as your overview of musical theatre in general. But you have several shows to your name already, I think.
Yes.
And we'll be touching on one or two of those quite shortly. But let's talk about forgive me, you're a young composer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's always interesting to find out when talking to somebody who's not yet jaded, how they fell in love with musical theatre in the first place, because there are one or two paths in. I'd be interested to hear yours.
Sure. Well, I used to be a dancer, and from a very young age, from around the age of 4.
That is a young age.
Yep.
I concur.
And also played the piano and the violin from a very young age as well. So have been a natural performer from a very young age, and got into music and performing, really. I just loved it from the get-go, and always brought to my piano lessons little pieces I'd created on the piano.
Oh, you were composing young?
Yeah, I didn't think of it as composing, though. It was more just experimenting with... It was a way to just not practice, because I could turn up at the lesson and say, oh, I've written this piece.
So you were a professional noodler, as it were?
Yeah, I think that sounds more like it.
And how old were you when you realised you had that ability, though, even if you didn't recognise it as an ability? I mean, when were you doing this? This
was around 7 or 8, I'd say, and I would perform these at the school concert. Really didn't think much of it at all, and my heart really was in dancing, because I was a competitive Irish dancer and took that really, really seriously until I was about 16. And so when I got to around the age of 13, 14, and really started becoming quite proficient on the piano and the violin, it was very hard to balance all three, and I knew something had to go, and I really did. My heart really had moved from dance to music, and so I'd say it was about then when when the pieces that I was still bringing to my piano teacher every so often were becoming more interesting and more thought-provoking, that I thought, well, this could be something I could go down the route of. I didn't think I would ever be good enough to be a concert pianist, but there was that side of classical music that I thought I could be a composer of if I wanted to be.
And yet, of the three things you've mentioned, I in no way downplay the other things, but the ability, because there's dance, there's playing, and then there's composition. And composition, sure. It seems to me to be when I say it's the most creative, it has the potential to be the most creative, because, as I say, what I don't want to do is damn the others by saying, because there is creativity in dance, but of course there are also set steps and things like that. Whereas it seems to me, and you aren't necessarily dredging yourself to find the creativity that you have to for composition. Tell me I'm wrong, by the way, because I don't compose. I mean, does it seem to be a more revealing form of creativity for you?
Gosh, that's interesting.
Exposing, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, the way I compose is probably different to the way everyone else that I know composes.
That's the word.
Where I study at the moment at Guildhall, there aren't many people who are interested in writing for theatre. There are a couple. The rest, I wouldn't. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that they want to go down the contemporary classical route. There are a lot of people there who are incredibly clever and have really mathematical minds, and who really do like things like matrices and looking up code and
all the romantic things like that.
Thinking about things like linguistics, to use those elements to inspire them to write. Whereas I think for me, my impetus for writing is theatre, and everything I write tends to have a dramatic impulse. Maybe dramatic is the wrong word, but it looks at dramaturgy, whether that's exploring character or motivation or ideas.
It's part of a context.
Yes, yeah.
You're developing. But there's a step I think we've missed, isn't there? Because you were telling me a minute ago that your music was sort of semi-classical,
Yes.
And then we've suddenly started talking about writing theatrical parts. So when did that change, and what's your catalyst?
Well, it was, I'd say, around 14, 15. I kind of knew musicals. I knew West Side Story, and not many other things. And was in Waterstones with my dad and saw the new Finishing the Hat book by Stephen Sondheim and thought, oh, hey, that's the guy who wrote the lyrics for West Side Story. Maybe I should buy this book. And I purely bought it for the purpose of just reading the West Side Story chapter. Read it, felt guilty that I didn't really want to read the rest of it, and so flicked to a different chapter, saw Company, and thought, okay, what's this? Looked it up, found a production on YouTube, watched the whole thing with the book in hand, followed the lyrics, read his commentaries, and just thought, wow, here is someone who has taken an idea, a genre, and has really crafted something beautiful here. I'd say that was the point I really fell in love with musical theatre, or knew I think I can write musical theatre, because it's got a dramatic context, and especially with people like Bernstein or Sondheim, they have had the training that allows them to really craft something that is intelligent.
Musical talk. Well, there we are, Colm Meloy, about whom we'll be hearing more on Musical Talk in the next year, and I rather think in the world of musical theatre thereafter. Now, he, of course, touched on Stephen Sondheim, and Stephen Sondheim is never far away from the thoughts of anyone interested in musical theatre. So, what better time to look forward to a discussion on Merrily We Roll Along, which I held with the director and musical director of a version which you could have seen at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And once we've heard that, we'll then move straight into an extract of a discussion I held with the people behind the Edinburgh Festival Fringe show, Title of Show. So, that's two well-known shows in a row. Let's start with Merrily. Musical talk. So you weren't worried by that because you have a sort of repertory.
Always worried.
Oh, okay.
Always. But I think with Edinburgh, we know that we're taking a risk, and we thought, well, if we come up here and the reviews may say, oh, they're far too young, as they said on the Broadway production. But I think if you find, you can always find reasons not to do the show, and for us, it's important that we just love what we're doing.
You do it.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
And there is no way of winning, because an actor is going to be whatever age he or she is. You know, whether that's young, old, or in the middle.
Yeah.
Because I thought it had exactly... The Maria Friedman version is often considered now to be the template from which everyone, you know, the high watermark of how to do Merrily. And it was excellent. Not flawless, but it was excellent. However, you know, the cast, I think, in one or two cases, struggled with getting younger.
Yeah.
Yours is slightly in reverse, of course, because you have a young cast, and I don't know, it's easier to project age than it is to project youth. Yeah. Would you care to express a view on that? No.
Gosh, I can't
it's
imagine.
It's imponderable, really.
I couldn't imagine pretending to be 18, no.
Well, I can imagine pretending.
Yes.
Whether I'd be very successful
Yes.
is quite another matter. The challenges are not just in the casting and in the piece, because there are narrative consequences and difficulties which we'll talk about going backwards, but the same is true for the score, isn't it? I mean, the score reflects their return to idealism, in the sense it becomes progressively less sophisticated, which I suppose is a double-edged sword, because by showing you're becoming less sophisticated, you're in fact showing how massively sophisticated you are. But I think that's just Sondheim. Is that boring for you as a musical director with your musicians? Because you know all the beefy, challenging, difficult stuff, at least ostensibly, is on the front, and then it becomes more and more.
Well, no,
reversion to the 50s, if you like.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Well, because the Sondheim is always challenging musically, and so everything, opening doors is towards the end, and that, for the singing itself, that's the most difficult one to learn and to get together. But Our Time is a brilliant song, and I think that's such a beautiful song, and that's right at the end. And that's when they're the most idealistic, the most simple, the most youthful. So. No, I wouldn't say that it's boring at all. I think it's interesting, because you go back and you can see the progression in reverse.
Simple question for the layperson: is it simpler to play, or is it actually that's just a deception, an illusion, perhaps?
What, another Sondheim?
The second act, if you like.
No, I think opening doors for the band is very difficult. But then there are songs in the first half that are very difficult. It isn't as simple as just getting more simple as you go through the play and as you go back in time. I don't think it's not as simple as that.
And even within opening doors, you've got the song within the song there.
You've got Who Wants to Live in New York.
Who Wants to Live in New York.
Yeah.
It fits so perfectly in that song, but it doesn't stick out. Does it feel musically different even within the passage of that song? Or do you think of it as a separate song? Because narratively it is.
Yes.
Is it musically?
No, I think not really. It fits in with. I feel that because every time you hear that tune, and it comes back, I think in three different instances, then it's completely different every time, or 4 different times it comes back, and every time it's in a different style, and it's
forever popping.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically to quote from the. And so no, I think he puts it so it fits in each time, and one thing I think that's really clever is that you never get the impression that actually Franklin Shepherd has only written one song and it's just being used over and over again. It sounds different every time, even though there's actually only one tune in the play that he's written that we hear.
Oh, I see.
But because we only hear one tune that he's written, but it doesn't feel like that when you're listening to it. You don't think that at all. And so it's really clever the way that he every time by just changing the style and by changing the orchestration, it becomes slightly different, and you don't feel bored by just hearing the same tune. I think that's really clever.
I mean, in very broad brush terms, would you care to sort of identify what the 4 different tonalities or feelings are of those, the variants?
It's the simplest one is when it's just Charlie, when it's just Frank playing the piano and Charlie singing in The Blob, and that's very similar when Frank sings Growing Up. And then there's the big Broadway, brassy, razzy hit at the opening of Act 2. When Gussie's singing it. And then there's the when they're performing it to Joe Josephson in the audition, or in yes, so
which is much more sort of
jolly and upbeat.
Upbeat, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's funny because as a non-musician, you watch the show, and actually until you said that, I didn't really make the connection with it as being the same 4, and that's why it's seamless.
Well, it's also one of these shows, I think, the more you watch it and see it again, you realise how much more there is, like a good piece of work, or a good work of art, perhaps. I mean, I've seen it now several times, different productions, but this production opened my eyes to some things I hadn't seen previously. Simple narrative devices as well. When we get to Charlie's television bust-up, shall we say, we get old friends first. And there's a line in it about there are too many lives at stake. You know, this friendship can't break up. There are too many lives at stake, is essentially the message, with that exact phrase in it. But of course, it's just been immediate. That phrase is immediately following the almost it's too appalling for words, but the death toll from Vietnam. We come out of a news story where they say 45,000 American soldiers have died. And then almost within 3 minutes, we're told that friendship can't break up because too many lives are at stake. And you've been shown so brutally how little lives are worth, shall we say. I don't mean that in any sense, but within this narrative. But that's, that's going to fail because of the contextualisation that's already been given to it. And then there's other throwaways as well, isn't there? I mean, when he's in the song, Charlie, he says that bit about, I've gone in too far, but a friendship is like a garden, it has to keep on growing. And then, of course, that's actually one of the lyrics in Good Thing Going.
Yeah,
it
should have kept on growing.
Instead of just kept on, which is a lovely lyric anyway. I had foolishly missed some of those resonances in previous productions, so I'd like to thank you, because your production has opened up yet another layer in this never-ending Easter egg, shall we say.
What we've found with audiences is that quite a few people who know the cast have seen it more than once, and they didn't know Merrily at all. They're not necessarily a Sondheim audience, and they all say the second time, it was really good to see it a second time because you see more things.
Yes, once you know the plot, you can concentrate on the detail.
Yeah.
And that's true of anything, isn't it? If anything that's got any quality in it, that might be worth a second read.
Yeah.
And then, because personally, I hadn't, my priority before we started hadn't been to read the script and study it really carefully. As we've been going through, and you realise that all of the minor characters, obviously, all their stories are completely linked, and you can see when people say lines and then they go to the next scene and then you realise why they've said it. And so for me, as sort of having a bit more of the experience of an audience member, every time that you watch it, you do see something different. And we were because as it's such an interesting musical, I speak about it with some of the people in the band, and we say that it's just, every time you watch it, you don't get bored of it. You just notice new things, and that's why it's so brilliant.
But that's a mixture of the text, the score, but also direction and musical direction as well. I mean, forgive me, how many of those did you want to pinpoint? Or are you happy to let the text do its work?
How do you mean?
Well, in a director's point of view, I mean, do some things you say, I can see a connection there. Sometimes, do you think I'll just make that bold enough so people can spot it and realise there's a hook, there's a trapdoor to this, or do you think actually I will let the text speak as it stands? I don't know if you ever feel that you have to overlay as a director, because directors you bring magic to a piece which I can't do. I just wondered
I think a lot of it actually happens by accident during the rehearsal process, because the more the more we rehearse the text, the more we realise that the connections and the poignancy of. There's a line where Mr. Spencer says to Beth, "Your mother would turn in her grave," and then because we rehearsed it more or less chronologically, you're talking about a character you haven't really rehearsed with yet, and then you realise when you start running it that you're talking about somebody who's dead, who you do know, and it all happens retrospectively, really.
Musical talk. The score. Now, it seems to me there are several different kinds of songs in the piece. There are here's almost a standalone kind of song or a conceit song. You know, for example, there is the song where an awful lot of Broadway flops are referenced. Mm-hmm. And then there are the songs which actually are a little bit more verbatim, if I can use that as a phrase, or realistic. As a musical director, do you treat them all the same? Do you treat them differently? How do you approach the score? And what surprises has the score given you?
So I think, for me, the score is about... I mean, I've done lots of musicals in the past, big orchestras and things. For me, this score in particular is about the dialogue and the words that are in it. I think that's what the whole show is about, getting that across, getting the comedy across in the words. I mean, the music
book and lyrics are premiere.
Yeah, I think so. And especially when I first started playing through it, I really enjoyed it, and there's catchy moments. But obviously, it's not a huge orchestra in Sondheim. But actually, when you do go into it, and people have left saying, "Oh, the harmonies in this were incredible," and in reality, lots of it is very simple. It's very simple, 4-part sort of music theatre, harmonies and chords. But it comes across, and we've got very, very talented singers, so it comes across incredibly powerfully.
It's
so
a
I
good
think
rich tone, by the way, coming out.
That's good to hear.
Musically, the singers are supported brilliantly by you, but they bring a very nice fugue of sounds and voices, if that makes sense. I'm not very good at describing these things, but it
blend well.
It comes together really nicely.
Yes, so, I mean, we spent a long time. I say a long time. We had 2 weeks of rehearsal. I think the first 3 or 4 days, we just nailed the music to make sure we had that level of perfection. Basically, that's what we've come up to do, a show that we hope is as perfect as it can be. So we wanted to make sure, at least the music, they come off at the same time. They've all got a lot of diction. But for me, the music is about getting the lyrics across. Although as the show's been going on, you do actually fall in love with it. It's very simple. There's no crazy chords like there are in Sondheim, but there's something beautiful about the way the songs are written. The structure, the melodies are actually really catchy.
They are, yes. And
we're singing.
They oughtn't to be.
Yeah, we're singing Nine People's Favourite Things, which is sort of the climax of the show at the end. I find myself singing that all the time, not just because we performed it at basically every single promo event every day this month, but it is incredibly catchy. And the song which Heidi sings at the end, The Way Back to Then, actually, it doesn't come out of nowhere, but the very first number, untitled opening number, is quite comedic, and it takes the mick out of musicals, and they're dancing around like they're in a musical. And I think that sets the tone, and you're expecting it to poke fun of itself and to be meta. And by the time you get to the end and things start falling apart a little bit, and Heidi sings the song about going back to then, it sort of hits you. When I read the script, it hit me as a bit of a surprise. I was getting used to all this humour, and then suddenly you're like, bam, this is quite real and quite emotional.
But it has to have some teeth, doesn't it? Because it's not vicious, but it has some sadness, some it's not without break. It is about a relationship, about a set of friends, actually, and friendship goes through highs and lows, and the stresses of anything like this changes that. So it has to have to continue to be real and have some speaks marks worth. I do put speech marks around that. It's got to have some kind of emotional depth.
Yeah.
And what's lovely about it, by the way, is the fact it isn't a love story. That's so refreshing. So refreshing.
True.
It's Viss and Gilbert and Sullivan, frankly. And even that pretends.
Yes. Well, no, I think also what's lovely to see, it's slightly bizarre, but to see 2 lead male characters who are both openly gay, who it's not about them being gay. No. They just get, and that's fine. And it's jokingly referenced in one scene. And the irony is that both the actors identify as straight. So it's great to see that it's not being made a thing of.
It's an acting job, isn't it?
Well, exactly, and it's like it's just a part of it's just a trait of the character. Like that's just it. It's not like this is a show about two gay guys. Like
No, and it really isn't.
No,
and
not at all.
As you say, if they were straight, it wouldn't actually
No,
make any
it wouldn't
real
make any
difference. The sensibility might change a little bit in one or two of the drag queen references.
yeah, but no, exactly.
You know,
but
you might not be able to start with a shrimp gag, but not so easily, anyway. So.
yeah.
We were talking about the music.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess
If you were saying how it reflected the emotional journey of the characters towards the end.
yeah, it gets more serious. I think that for me, that's what I really enjoy. Is that I feel this is probably quite simplistic. It lulls you into a false sense of security at the beginning, and then it hits you with the really emotional song at the end, which is also written beautifully.
But it's a poignant song. It's not a screaming 11th hour.
No, it's not sad.
I am kind of a.
Poignant is probably a very, very good word. Reflective.
Yes.
I think as well, that might be overlooked a lot of the time is the underscoring. I think the underscoring really aids, in a really subtle way, the narrative on stage and the emotion on stage and stuff like that. And also the other thing that I was thinking about was the fact that this whole sort of one piano thing, it could quite easily be seen as quite novelty, but I don't think it is that at all.
It works very well.
And the music is testament, I think, to the work's success.
I didn't feel shortchanged at all. I mean, forgive me, your production is exactly pitched to the environment it's in, the audience it's getting. It just comes across marvellously. Forgive me, you've put a lot of thought into how you're going to do it, and I appreciate. Sorry?
You're forgiven.
Oh, I'm going to have that emblazoned on a T-shirt. But the thought you put in to make this exactly right, and it is exactly right. As an audience member, I went in hoping for the best, and when I came out, I had the best. I had. So, as a production team, you've thought carefully about what you're doing. And you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how many people come up and just do a show. And you can just, speech marks, do a show. But you can engage with your show, you can think about your show. You can, the conversation you're having with me immediately tells me you've been thinking about these things. And so I can't fault it. Narrative question for you, if I may. Slightly cheeky question, and there is no right or wrong answer. I've said that before, but it's still true. Is title of show merely Merrily We Roll Along in the right order? And Merrily We Roll Along is referenced in the piece, of course, as a flop, in one of the flops. Merrily We Roll Along is a flashback show about a creative partnership which has collapsed, and then it goes back in flashback to their idealistic start about let's put on the show, and they're successfully doing so. It does not follow all the tropes and ticks and moves of that, even if you did Merrily in the chronological order rather than the narrative order. But there is an element of a creative partnership that starts off idealistically, gets a show which is a success, takes it further, a little bit of difficulty in that relationship in terms of stress. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, completely.
Jeff and Hunter would have definitely known, they would have seen parallels. I mean, they're obviously massive music theatre experts, so they must have known. They everything they do, I'm sure they're referencing something. Yes. There's a bit in the score where, I don't know if this is the case, she says Miles, and she's got a blues note, and I jokingly said to my assistant director, maybe he's referencing Miles Davis. It's very specific, but I don't know if they probably didn't use it as a basis, but
I think that their story is quite universal to like theatre creators, people who work in the theatre industry, and that you often get a lot of partnerships. One that puts off the top of my head is Pasek and Paul, two American composers.
And what have they done just for the rest?
So they worked on Dogfight.
Right, okay, yes.
Yes, they wrote a number of songs for the TV show Smash, Edges, things like that. So they're contemporary.
Yes, very much now, aren't they?
Very much now. I think that because to go back to Stephen Sondheim, he always talks about collaboration and how he loves collaborating, and that I really believe that theatre, on the creative team and the cast, but particularly on the creative team, is a collaborative effort. And so there's always going to be tensions and things like that. So when you're then telling a story about creators, especially with a partnership of people who are very good friends and then they decide to collaborate, I think there are going to be parallels with that. Whether it's Merrily Roll Along backwards, I can't answer that.
And it is a slightly facetious point I'm making.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I
thought it was an interesting.
It's interesting.
parallel.
It is interesting, and the fact that they reference it, I think that
we could ask. I mean, we've been in Twitter conversations with Jeff and Hunter.
Why? Because there was a bit at the beginning. There was a bit at the beginning when in Untitled Opening Number, which for the people who haven't seen the show, it's
foolish people.
Yeah, foolish people. You should definitely get down. At 9:20.
I will be asking.
The Untitled Opening Number is kind of like a bit like a prologue almost. In that it kind of sets up the show, but it's not within the realm of the show. And they reference a bit, and they say these are shapes, and it's very specific. These are shapes on the beat. And I tweeted, I believe it was Jeff. I tweeted him saying, doing a production of Untitled Show in Edinburgh, really stumped as to what this could be referenced to. Is this a reference? Is this something that I've missed? And he replied saying, no, this is just
shapes.
This is just 3 shapes.
Oh, really?
And we were like, right.
It is what it says.
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty.
It has hidden shallows.
Well, no, exactly. It's that there's lots in the show that is very, very deep into obscure references,
which they mention in the show as well.
Which they
say it's too obscure.
They let you know that it's postmodern.
Yes, but there's also stuff that they've kind of come up with themselves, and that then has to be celebrated in itself.
Musical talk. Well, there we are, a discussion on title of show, and before that, merrily we rolled along. And as I've said before, all the extracts you're hearing today are from longer conversations I've held with people, which will be played in their entirety over the next few months. And of course, both of those interviews were held up in Edinburgh this year. Our Edinburgh coverage is a really important part of Musical Talk. I've been responsible for that for the last 10 years, and it's a true pleasure. But of course, as you know, it's not just about the established shows. One of the joys is also finding out about the new shows. So let's find out about 2 of those next. In a minute, we'll hear a short extract with Desmond O'Connor talking about Royal Vauxhall, which was my pick of the Fringe in Edinburgh this year. And before that, you'll hear a bit of the conversation I held with Rick Gard about his new show, Stop the Train, one of the shows that everyone was talking about in Edinburgh this summer. And to lead into that, let's hear a song from that show.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Baby girl, it's a big, big world and there's many fish in the sea. I'm not trying to roam, but I'm flesh and bone, so you'd better keep your eye on me. I'm not trying to flirt, I'm not trying to hurt, don't even wanna be free. But when I see them walk and I hear them talk, well, that's the end of me. They got bumps and curves just for hors d'oeuvres, and I haven't even mentioned the lips. They've got wild eyes that make you lie and legs right up to their hips. They're from outer space, they're the Pharaoh race, and we all know who's in control. But with the lick of their lips and the swing of their hips, well, a man can lose his soul. Stop, 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 stop it, I like it. Why don't you stop, 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 it feels good. It's so wrong, I'm getting excited. Please don't stop, though I know you should. Take Adam and Eve, now Eve won't leave till Adam tastes her wares. When a woman wants, you better say yes, or you better start saying your prayers. In every place there's a pretty face, a tempting variety. But I'm not looking, not available, please don't tempt me. Stop, 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 stop it, I like it. Why don't you stop, 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 it feels good. It's so wrong, I'm getting excited. Please don't stop, though I know you should. 5'2", eyes blue, skin as smooth as cream. Not to have her a nightmare, but to have her a dream. Eloquent and radiant with 2 first-class degrees, and the kind of hips which fingertips were invented just to tease. She gave me the eye, and I ignored her. She gave me the eye, so I looked away. She gave me the eye, and so I sighed a sigh. I'm weak, and I'm being astray, astray. Stop, 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 stop it, I like it. Why don't you stop, 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 it feels good. It's so wrong, I'm getting excited. Please don't stop, though I know you should. Dark and dirty, round about 30 with 42 on top. She knows her wine and all things fine and likes to dance till you drop. I said I like to sing, she said I like to swing, but I didn't see her moving her feet. Then she stroked my thigh and looked me right in the eye and said something that I can't repeat. Oh, I like it. Stop, 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 it feels good. It's so wrong, I'm getting excited. Oh, please don't stop, though I know you should. Please don't stop, though I know you should.
Well, hello, my name's Rick Gard. I'm from the brand new musical Stop the Train. I am the writer and the producer, first-time producer.
And first time in Edinburgh, I think.
That's right, that's right. I came here as an actor about 10 years ago, thoroughly enjoyed the experience, but didn't know what I was doing, was making it up as I was going along, and I've always wanted to come back with a piece. Decided I was going to come back this year with a brand new piece, which I've written, my first musical I've written, and I am over the moon with the results so far.
Well, I think you have every right to be, because Stop the Train is a fantastic show, and what's marvellous about it is it's premiering here in Edinburgh, isn't it?
That's right, that's right.
And it feels completely fully formed. I know it is fully formed.
That is music to my ears.
But not every... well, thank you. Well, it was literal music to my ears. Of course, it's a musical. But not all shows arrive in an absolute tip-top sort of super polished state. This is well written, it's well performed, it's well produced. Everything about it is really good.
That's very kind, thank you.
So, let's start with the bare bones for our listeners. Would you care briefly, without giving anything away, of course, because we're lucky to go on tour and come to a theatre near you, give us the bare bones of a story, if you can.
Oh, Stop the Train is about a group of commuters who are on a train every day. They spend time with each other, probably more time than they do with some of their families, but the idea is they see each other every day, but they never communicate. And we've devised something that happens that makes these people come together, and as a result we get to know all their little idiosyncrasies, their private lives, their secrets, and we show all their lives and their stories in a kind of juxtaposition between that harsh reality and fantasy, and all that comes out in song.
That is a very fair way of putting it, and we'll explore that a little bit more as we go on, if I may. But so, what's the history of it? How did it come about?
My background is in writing music for pop artists. I was an artist myself. I was with Universal for quite a number of years, and I've been working with the same co-writer, a guy called Phil Rice, who I've been working with since I was 17 at college.
Well, Andrew Lloyd Webber has historically done well with someone called Rice, so I don't see why you shouldn't.
Yes, it's good. It's good. So yes, we've been together working for a long time. As I say, we had our own career in that, and we've always talked about musicals. We both loved musicals, but wanted to do something a little bit different, so we talked, and eventually a couple of years ago we actually sat down and started writing it. As you said rightly, is premiering here, but we've done what we call workshop shows. So we've done 6 workshop shows where we've done in different areas around where we're from, the northwest of England, and we've put a show on, looked at the reaction from the audience, gone away, rewritten it, changed some songs, put some in.
It's a workshop performance rather than a workshop, because some workshops are just with actors, aren't they, and the production and the writers too. So yeah, it out in an enclosed environment.
Exactly.
You were when I say this, I mean it nicely. You were exposing yourself.
Absolutely. I have been known to, yes. So yes, the idea was that there's nothing better than an audience to tell you when you've got it right or run it wrong. So we'd spend a week with the actors, getting it where we thought it was right, put it in front of the audience, and where it drops, we'd cut it out. Where it works well, we'd heighten that. So that's been the process. The actors have given a lot of time to rehearse, and we're very proud of how slick it is.
Yes.
But I'm also very aware, seeing it in front of an Edinburgh audience, what needs to change. Straight away, I'm seeing weaknesses that I want to put right from the way they react, because that's what it's all about. It's constant refinement. Somebody told me very early on, you never write a musical, you rewrite it.
Yes.
And it couldn't be more true. And things go out of fashion very quickly, references go out of fashion.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make it as universal as possible. I always had in the back of my mind that because it's based on a city train, I wanted it to be that it could be any city.
Oh, yes.
And that, I'm very thankful to say, seems to have worked, because I got a gentleman who came up to me yesterday from New York who said, this reminds me of my trip every day in and my commute. And he said, this will work, this is it. And he's been in 3 days in a row now to see it. We've only done 4 shows so far. So I'm very pleased.
Card, doesn't he?
I think he will do at this rate. He may get a free ticket if he comes for the whole 2 weeks.
So, historically, in terms of writing, because you perform, which I think gives you a very good grounding for how things structurally work, even if you've just organically learned how to do that. But, forgive me, how do you delineate the work? You have your co-writers.
That's right.
Is it one of these cases where one of you writes the book, one of you writes the songs, one of you writes the lyrics? Are you an organic fusion body?
It really is. That's a perfect way of looking at it. An organic fusion. I like that. I'll use that in the next interview. Thank you. But that's what it is. I mean, we have our penchants for certain things. I love lyrics. I love top line, melody. But at the same time, we do it all between us. And the same with the book. You know, nothing gets past either of us. We both sign it off, and we both have the input. So it is a very democratic situation, and we've working together for years, and we hardly ever fall out. We just never go forward with something unless we both agree.
Well, that's a very good and democratic way forward as well.
It seems to work.
Got to ask you a couple of questions. I mean, these are nuts and bolts questions in some way, but you were talking about how that you'd be kicking ideas together until you came up with something that made it gel.
Yes.
So it's definitely book first.
No, the idea of the book first. Then we started a few of the songs, and then wrote the book, and then finished the songs, then rewrote the book, then rewrote the songs, then it keep changing.
So once again, it's the organic development kind
absolutely,
of thing.
Absolutely.
You know, some people will say, well, once I got the book right, that then told me what my plot was and where the nexus points are to put the songs in, etc., etc. But the way you've done it is equally valid in the sense of actually, well, we've changed this, so we then changed that, and then that made us change this.
Yes.
And that's fine too, because there is no textbook way of writing a musical.
No, it's doing a jigsaw in the dark, isn't it? That's the way I look at it.
So unless you open the fridge door, you don't get any light at all. So I would like to talk a little bit about the concept of the piece, because this is why I think this show is so successful compared to others of a family of kind of shows to which it could be described to belong to, if I can use a slightly long-winded sentence. There have been over the years, and this is my 10th year in Edinburgh, I love it every year, and of course one of the opportunities for coming a lot is seeing a lot of shows that you might not see, or you may never see again.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if a show is good or bad, because, for £10 or whatever it is, you can afford to take some chances. It opens and broadens people's horizons, so it's a wonderful thing as a festival. But that also means that I've seen trends and developments, and I don't want to damn this show, because I don't, it's a fantastic show, but what I'm saying is there's a kind of show, I've seen a number of shows which are set on trains or railway platforms,
right,
and have taken, to a degree, the same concept of, you've got a similar group of people who meet on a day-to-day basis because they're commuters, who don't talk. The isolation, how do we break that up? And in most of these shows, and it becomes a little samey after a while, there's no obvious, when I say linking narrative, but there's no facilitator that allows the conversations to take place. So you get this, what I sort of think of as the Tisch School argument, which is that you have someone stands up and tells their story, and then someone else will tell their story, and then someone else will tell their story. And it might be that the plot is clever enough to link those stories in some incidental way, and so it sort of meshes into a fugue of stories. That's the theory, I think. It doesn't always work as smartly, as cleverly as that. And that's a perfectly valid way of doing it. There's a show up here in Edinburgh at the moment. It's not set on a train, but it is for individuals whose lives intertwine with each other whilst not necessarily connecting directly in most cases, called Ordinary Days. It's actually a very good piece, very well written, beautifully performed, and actually it's I can't criticise it, except I've seen the kind of thing so often. What I really like about Stop the Train is you have found a much cleverer way of making this work. So you have found, without revealing what it is, a kind of narrative character who fits in within the world it works. So he's not, like any drama, something unusual happens at the beginning, and then the reactions to it take place as a result. So this character, and he is a character, and he's an enigmatic character. You really don't know what his motivations are. You really don't know if he means what he says, and he turns on the sixpence as well. So he's got a lovely little bit of edge. So he provides for jeopardy, if you like.
Yes.
So you've come up with this clever framework device, which then allows the characters to explain who they are and interact and things like that. And I found that so much more satisfying than just it's my turn now, I'll stand up. So
that's good to know.
Well, no, but forgive me. You've given a perfectly acceptable canon of musicals a beautiful new twist, and it needed it, frankly, because if it had just been, it's now my turn to stand up and sing my want song, I would have said very nicely done, but not as good as it is as it actually is?
Well, I can't say that is entirely by device. Now, there's one thing that I will say, it may put me in a bad light, but I'm going to be honest as well.
Thank you.
Is that Phil and I, my co-writer, we purposely stayed away from musicals and plays. We're not well versed in this form at all, and we wanted to make sure that we came from it from another point of view. So if we've broken theatre conventions, it's not being clever, it's because we're not knowledgeable.
Well, no, I don't think you've broken theatre conventions. That it is just, it's not a convention, it's just that it has become there is a particular kind of musical that feels like this.
It's become a style of that, okay.
And I love the fact that there are, and it's not just this musical, there are other musicals where people have said, well, this is my first musical. I think not being trapped by the tradition or the conventions, or even just the fashion, let's be honest, because like all forms of drama, there are fashions and fads in musical theatre as there is in everything else.
Absolutely.
Is rather wonderful. You came to your plot independently, and you independently saw what the problem might be if you did it in one way, and you overcame that. And I think that's, forgive me, this is all positive. Everything
well, no,
it's
good.
Wonderful
really to hear, because, as I say, because we're new to this genre and we're really enjoying it. We take... The goal is to get it right, and I don't care where the criticism, be it destructive or constructive, comes from, as long as the final goal is something that entertains everybody. This is a process for me, and in our minds, if we thought for any minute we've reached that goal, then we're fools. We have a long way to go. It's shining, it's honing.
You're certainly at the top of the staircase, though. If you don't mind me saying. I can
good
certainly
to hear.
say that. Musical talk.
So my name is Desmond O'Connor. I'm the writer, composer, lyricist of Royal Vauxhall, the musical about the night that Freddie Mercury and Kenny Everett took Princess Diana in disguise, in drag, to a gay pub in London.
Which is a fantastic premise for a show. So let's talk about the book first of all. I mean, forgive me, this is a sort of an urban myth, isn't it?
Well, I'm assured that it's a true story. It
By
was
sources close to the palace.
Yeah, I mean, I read the story in the paper a few years ago. No, so about a year and a half ago now. It was, of course, famously retold by Cleo Ruckus in her autobiography, The Art of Positive Drinking. And
she's Kenny Everett's close friend.
Exactly, very dear friend of Kenny. And so that was kind of all over the press in London. I think I read it in the Standard or Metro, and was just intrigued by the story when I read it. So I'm kind of, at the time I remember thinking it's sort of such a preposterous story that it must be true, because you wouldn't make up something that was so ridiculous and so implausible. And the whole framing of it, they were sitting watching the Golden Girls and suddenly decided, let's go out. So I kind of knew the moment that I read the story that I had to do something with it, even if it was something frivolous and fun and just a kind of big gay musical, which I think was my thought at the time. And then inevitably, when you start to scratch the surface and start to think about the people involved and the moment in their lives, I started to realise there was a much bigger story to be told.
Slightly darker one as well.
Slightly darker, and I guess it's always interesting when something pricks your consciousness as a writer. It tends to happen in quite I think Bob Dylan does it tells a great story about sort of the inspiration sort of flying over him, or the genius flying over him, and that sort of tends to be the way that an idea arrives, and you're not always aware of why something has appealed to you. And it was only when I started to think about the telling of the story that I kind of realised, that the characters were so vitally important to me and was such a huge part of my life in the 80s, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
I hope we will.
And then there was a very important political aspect, because it just happened that sort of a short while after reading the story, I was guest hosting a club called Bar Whatever at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. Now that is one of the most brilliantly Catholic with a small c, all-inclusive. It's an LGBTQ XYZ night, but really the doors are open to absolutely anybody exactly who needs who needs
I am aware of the door meaning.
It's not that kind of club, but it's very much about having a totally safe, all-inclusive space for anyone who I think for one reason or another might be made to feel that they don't belong, to say, well, you do, you belong here. And so it was a phenomenal honour to be asked by Ingo to come and guest host that club for a month. And while I was doing that, we suddenly started losing all these iconic venues in London. So we lost the Joiners Arms, we lost Madame Jojo's, we lost the Black Cap. We were about to lose the Royal Vauxhall Tavern.
I know, there was a big thing about that about a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. And that was sort of the genesis of this show, because I kind of realised I'm not part of the LGBT community, but I've always felt very closely aligned to it.
You're a close friend.
Exactly, through my work in cabaret and through all of my friends and colleagues. And I think that we had suddenly accidentally arrived at a time where we thought, well, suddenly gay rights are, top of the agenda, and we've got gay marriage, and suddenly it's a very safe and accepting world in which to be gay.
It's a better world.
A better world, but not. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of the journey.
It's not the best world. Yes.
No,
if
definitely.
We're talking comparatives
and
and superlatives. Yes.
Exactly, and I think that's something that was communicated to me brilliantly when I was still a teacher. When a gay colleague got married to his husband, and was fantastically proud and fantastically excited. And still, when one of the parents at the school asked him, noticed he was married and asked about his wife, and he didn't correct, and he said, he just felt so conflicted about that. And I think that that's still the true story for a lot of gay men and women in England, that yes, okay, your rights are equal technically to everybody else, but it's not an equal world.
No, I'm always being asked about my wife and children, who are invisible. So
live in Canada. So sorry, maybe sort of gone off piece there slightly, but the
no, but I think it's good contextual stuff, because it's absolutely true. And but even though we do live in a much better world, we forget actually how grim I was there in 1988, and it was a grim, in many ways, frightening place.
Yeah,
and even the top of society, at least in show business, well, in fact, literally, in terms of royalty, if you look at the world in that hierarchical way, were forced into enclosures, by which I mean social enclosures, I don't mean literal ones.
Yeah.
So yes, it was a dark and dangerous time, and we forget that.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of younger gay friends, and bless them, they know intellectually what it was like, but they don't know what it was like.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a boring old fart, but
I don't think that does at all sound like that. And I think that venues, certainly at the time that the show is set, venues like the Royal Vauxhall Tavern would just have a fundamental importance to the community, as you say, on every social strata. And it would be very easy to believe that, oh, it's fine, we don't need places like that anymore. Well, I would say try telling that to the trans teenager who's been ostracised or beaten up or bullied or hassled and harangued by every single person that they know, and they need somewhere that they can go to feel safe. And that person, to my mind, is in exactly the same boat as the world-famous rock star who needs somewhere they can go to feel safe. As the high-paid television comedian who needs somewhere that they can go and be themselves. And indeed, yes, even the wife of the heir to the throne just needs somewhere she can be herself for a night. And that's really where Royal Vauxhall was born, of that need for a place that we can be ourselves.
So, but immediately, that you mentioned the word frivolous at the beginning, but absolutely everything you've said there is not frivolous in any way at all. However, what you do straddle so perfectly in the piece, if I may say, is that mixture of light frivolity and zaniness of three friends actually having a night in.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because you feel the connection between them. And the difficulty, and because it's a play like any other play or a musical, that as good drama, something happens and then things can get darker, and they do get darker, and also things are revealed inadvertently, sad, bad things. Not everyone comes out of it with an enhanced reputation. Maybe the best way of putting it. So we have but that's good drama. It's a well-written book, but it has its lightness, and it needs that lightness. And actually, I'm going to be honest, Kenny Everett of the three of the triptych is the one that I have the closest connection to.
Yeah.
Such an important part of my teenage life. And I've sort of carried him ever since, even though he's now starting to be forgotten in some circles, which is a sad thing.
It's a really sad thing. I guess there's a couple of things there that I would immediately pick up on that you said, in terms of the lightness and the frivolity of the script and the music. And the reason it had to be a musical and not a play is that, really lightness and frivolity and music and dancing are the things that we use to steer us through the darkness. Yes. And so therefore, as part of my creative palette, they're always there. And whether I'm writing musicals about the anti-terror laws, as I have, or the banking crisis, music's a really central part of delivering a much deeper, darker theme. But then also, Kenny Everett, and it's just heartbreaking that, when I stand on the Royal Mile flying for the show, as I do, because I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty to promote a show. Or wet.
If the day requires it.
Yes, or wet and dirty, but we're going down a whole different line there.
My penny has just dropped, but thank you for offering it.
But, Kenny Everett is the person who I need to describe to people and explain to people. And even in the show, the very first sort of drafts that we did, I had, very well-respected colleagues coming up to me and saying, so who was this other guy? I don't really know who you're talking. I didn't listen to the radio back then. It's like, well, he was only the most influential DJ of the country, of the era, and the most influential TV personality.
Modern radio, goes back to Kenny. I
Yeah,
think.
you know,
it
on
really
radio
does.
you wouldn't have Steve Wright. On TV you would never have had the young ones. You would never have had Friday Night Live. The whole wave of alternative British comedy was thanks to people like Kenny Everett. But, you know, I think really he was the person who spearheaded it.
Well, the video cassette in the 70s on ITV before even he got onto the BBC.
Yeah. But he destroyed his career and he destroyed himself because, as I have said on more than one occasion, in the 1980s, every little boy in the country wanted to be Kenny Everett, apart from Kenny Everett.
Yes. It's that almost self-loathing thing going on, isn't it? Which was, we forget that's a big important, well, it was important, regrettable, but important, or an often regular part of being a gay man in that period. Because so many people who were out, even out people, didn't always want to be out. In fact, most didn't, because society was so difficult and awkward.
And even the people that we celebrated on television, I'm thinking of the sort of John Inmans of the era, and the Kenneth Williams, Frankie Howard, all those people that, you know, were very, you know, what we would identify now as very obviously gay men, were not openly gay men. Well, because of course for the majority of their careers it was illegal. When Kenny Everett rose to fame, it was only just legal in this country.
It certainly wasn't accepted.
It was certainly not accepted. So, you know, we love these people. It's kind of highlighted in one of the songs. We love these people to be flamboyant and camp and outrageous and over the top, but we don't like to think about what they do in their bed
life.
when they go home. Yeah,
and so much of the show thematically is about imagery and protective imagery and the ability to trust someone enough to remove that. And then, of course, whether you can trust those people in the way that you think you can, which of course is explored.
Indeed.
Very nicely and subtly, actually, because it's none of the actions. I'm not going to explain how it develops and what happens necessarily, but I don't want to ruin it for anyone who I hope is going to go and see it. But people are driven by different needs: panic, fear of exposure. I mean, that's a, you know. That still exists today for different reasons. Sometimes the same reason, in fairness, but that makes people do terrible things, or it can make people do terrible things, and these things are explored. So I think, as I say, I go back to this wonderful balance of boom in your face, isn't this funny, zany, to use a Kenny phrase, zany comedy, and a real subtle investigation into what trapped people do, because they're all trapped in their own way, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to give away too much about the structure of the piece because I think it's important, but there is there's almost a kind of Wicklow purgatorial kind of setting to the whole thing. You know, whilst the show is set in Chelsea and then later in Vauxhall, it could just as easily be set in purgatory and or heaven/hell.
So, Mr. Dante, any thoughts on finishing it? No. Musical talk. Well, there we are. You heard Rick Gard talking about Stop the Train, and then after that Desmond O'Connor talking about Musical Talk's Pick of the Fringe for 2016, Royal Vauxhall. And you'll be pleased to know there is a chance to see that show, because its last 3 performances are taking place in November. If you want to see it, you can. It's on the 16th, the 23rd and the 24th of November at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern itself. The website for that, www.vauxhalltavern.com. Time, I think, for one more look at a brand new show from Edinburgh. So let's hear a small extract of a conversation I had about Paper Hearts. Musical talk.
The story is set in a bookshop in England. We don't specify where. And it's about a young man who's the manager of the bookshop, and he's also an aspiring book writer. And he's writing a book, and the bookshop gets into some financial difficulties, and a large corporation come in to take over. And he meets a girl, and they fall deeply in love. And while all this is going on, then we have an alter world, which is the book that he is writing, which is set in Russia. So we've 2 storylines going on, both love stories, both couples in very different worlds.
And yet, one of the great things about the book is the way that if we say the bookshop is the real life, the way that the real life informs the book as it is being written by our hero, if you like, and that in turn allows those characters to come to life as he writes them,
yes.
And then what they do, if you like, re-informs real life, it seems to me. It seems to me that both of the worlds we're seeing inform each other backwards and forwards. And of course that's also signified even more strongly by having the same actors playing different parts in the piece. And so if you choose, you can also draw parallels between who's being cast in what role, if you like. As in, is his manager in the imagination the hero of the Russian story, or is that just something else? These are the questions. I know there's no answers to them. So what's the history of Paper Hearts? Because its Edinburgh iteration is extremely good, extremely sophisticated. So it feels to me like it must have had a little bit of buffing on the way, if you don't mind me saying.
I think it has had a lot of buffing. It started off originally about maybe nearly 5 years ago now, and our writer, Liam O'Rafferty, he just had inspiration one day. He was in his friend's bookshop and they were sitting down for some event, and he said that he was just sitting in the bookshop and he just kind of imagined the whole world around him come alive, you know, one of those inspiring, euphoric moments, and all the characters kind of popped in. He said, wouldn't it be great to write a musical that's set in a bookshop, and then it just kind of progressed from there. Now the script has gone through several rewrites and redrafts, you know. The first drafts of anything, exactly, first drafts of anything are never
quite right.
Quite right, and
so
and then
you do see a few up here in Edinburgh.
You definitely do. And then he got in contact with our director, Tanya, and she helped him then kind of shape the story a little bit more and develop it and kind of hone it in.
So she acted as a dramaturg, essentially?
Essentially, yes, yeah.
And when did you come on board?
I came on board, funny enough, I met Tanya last year at a producers and directors networking event in London.
Which is what it was for then.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. By a lovely man, Chris O'Grady, who hosted. And we just had a chat, and we had mutual friends and we're similar ages, and I'd never worked in a musical before. And so I was just asking if I could, be of any assistance, and here I am.
But you've never done a musical before, so when you came on board, did you... I suppose the obvious question is, how do you, as a director who has done drama first and not musicals, if you make that differentiation, how did you approach this? Were there any challenges that you felt particularly big?
Honestly, no. I think that musical theatre and straight theatre are very, very similar.
I do too, as it happens, but people don't.
All the main difference is that when you get to a heightened sense of emotion, that's when the song comes out. And sometimes you really miss that in theatre. I mean, a lot of theatre now is actually using music and using things for those moments, but it's not a musical theatre, it's music drama or drama with music. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, I agree with that, absolutely. Things are becoming much more cinematic as well.
Definitely.
So people are much more used to that. But funnily enough, I was talking only earlier today with the writer, and he was making the observation that actually the advantage of turning something into a musical or making it a musical is that it allows clunkiness, because sometimes a character does need to sort of explain who they are a little bit.
Yes.
And sometimes that can be done very badly, whereas actually a song is an accepted step change which nobody bats an eye at, and it's a really useful dramatic tool.
Yeah, because in our story we explain who Isaac is in one song.
Yes.
And I don't know how we would have done that in a straight play, because it would have taken a lot more probably time to develop the story, get everyone to everyone to understand.
The info dump, which is also
like have to read something before you go in. So we get that done very quickly in one song, and it's very entertaining too.
But I'm quite interesting that you sort of joined the project, as it were, when it was already relatively developed. So
yes.
You were sent the script, obviously, to read through. What immediately leapt out of it, from it to you?
Honestly, it wasn't more so the script, is more so I got sent the tracks of the songs.
Oh, right, okay.
And the songs drew me in.
It's the score that brought you in.
The score, yeah. The score really brought me in. Because we workshopped, even when we had the text finished, we actually workshopped it for 4 days in rehearsals with the actors, so a lot of things were then also readjusted and changed and developed too.
And because the thing that strikes me, actually I'll ask you the question, how would you describe the score itself in terms of tone and possibly even sort of genre, if that can be said?
It's a collective mix, I think. We don't stick to one genre, obviously, because we're going from modern day England to 1940s Russia. So there's that.
The Second World War as well.
Exactly, yeah.
More conflict than we might usually have.
Yes, so I think there's kind of something for everyone in the musical, really.
It's got a very strong folk feel, though. Although it's it's a fusion meal, isn't it? Because
there's
some good Jewish bits in it, and some good sort of folky bits and Russian-y bits. I know there's huge overlap in some of those areas already, and that's obviously in the Russian piece. And as you say, there's a slightly more jazz feel, perhaps, but it's in the contemporary parts, you would say, slightly more. But what it is, it's a very sophisticated. The score is a good reflector of the duality of the piece, it seems to me, because it seems to help delineate the characteristics of the environment we're in each section.
Definitely. Our MD, Dan Jarvis, he did a lot of work on that score, helping Liam orchestrate and arrange and kind of develop it, because it was written originally on just guitar.
Oh, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yep. Really?
Because it's a little orchestra now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Cello, 2 violins, piano, drums, bass guitar.
Which in Edinburgh terms is actually very impressive, if I may say. But it's got this beautiful tone and sound across the whole thing. It's a very sophisticated score, I think. I remember it almost like a chamber piece. Quite a rich chamber piece. Not bitty in any way, but very sort of rich, covering... I'm going to use glue, but when I use the word glue, I don't mean in that kind of sort of blocking it up sense. I mean as in helping to contextualise and recontextualise what we're seeing. And delineate where we are, because actually it can be confusing in narrative terms, can it not? I mean, there's such different locales, but even so, jumping from one to another could confuse an audience.
It could, definitely, but I think we were very lucky with the actual musicians that we obtained in our auditions, because it could have definitely not been as well put together. Like the music again workshopped a little bit, so we added, like, we didn't know that we originally only had one violin player, but then Matthew Atkins, who plays Isaac and Norman, he is also a violin player.
Because he brings one on towards the end.
He brings one on and kind of adds lovely layers in certain songs, and just again the actors during the rehearsals, they themselves were offering suggestions and ideas, and it was just fantastic.
That's the joy of the collaborative nature of art, isn't it?
Yeah.
It seems to me that actually when you're putting on a show, and particularly a musical, when you've got extra people that you might not have in a straight drama, I use the terms wrongly but for shorthand, you will have orchestra, you will have extra people, but you all have to forge that thing together, and if you're looking in the same direction, you can bring things to the table which perhaps others haven't seen. Musical talk. That was a conversation about Paper Hearts, which was a musical about a man writing a book. But the reverse often happens, as I'm sure you're aware. Many musicals are based on books, and one such, or maybe I should say several such, are those related to J.B. Priestley's fantastic 1929 novel, The Good Companions. And in the next year of Musical Talk, I'll be dedicating at least one episode, and perhaps more, to talk about the different musicals which have been written for that fantastic book. Because it was turned into a film at least twice, as well as being dramatised for television, and for a famous West End musical. On each occasion, you will find music especially written for each adaptation. The most famous, of course, being that 1970s production written by Johnny Mercer and Andre Previn. And when BBC Radio 3 chose relatively recently to record The Good Companions by Previn and Mercer, they called upon a good friend of this programme, Stuart Matthew Price, to play the rather wonderful role of stage performer Jerry Jerlingham. As we'll hear from this short extract with the always lovely Stuart Matthew Price. Musical talk.
I'm very lucky. I've been lucky enough to be involved in with BBC Radio 3 for their centenary presentation of The Good Companions, which is for Johnny Mercer, who wrote the lyrics for the piece.
It's his last major theatrical show, in fact.
Yes.
Was it about 2 years before? 1974, is it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, very, very early 70s, 73, 74, and it's based on the 1930s. Book by J.B. Priestley, who obviously we spoke about earlier, writing Inspector Calls. I mean, the book's fantastic, and it just kind of summarises up this travelling theatrical troupe and trying to make a buck, really, and just survive, and the pitfalls.
And the unusual sort of ways and strays and waifs that they sort of pick up on the way, who are quite well-to-do in some ways. There's a sort of a middle-class woman who's just lost her father, and a former Latin teacher in a public school, and
your local northerner. He just his kind of home life is going a little bit dysfunctional for him, and instead of just going, right, I'll deal with that, he's like, no, I I want to get out and I want to do something. And then they all, by chance and fate, meet each other. Then through the power of Morton Mitchum, the banjo player that comes to join the at the time the Dinky Doos,
which is
that's
the name
really
of their
cool.
travelling group, isn't it? Yes.
He introduces them all, and they all come on board, and the well-to-do lady, Miss Trent, ends up being the kind of producer and saving the troupe and giving us this chance to perform again. And Inigo Jolifant, who is the graduate, happens to tinkle on the ivories a little bit and ends up being our new pianist. And it just all enrolls. And Jess, who's the northern chap, is kind of more like the father figure, and it's a very funny character because he has nothing to do with theatre, doesn't know anything he's talking about, but he's the good, he's the moral of the group.
He's almost the glue that holds the rest of them together in a way, isn't he? He's
Yeah.
a touch of reality in a slightly bizarre world.
Definitely, the North are good at that, and it's
Let's not spring to any generalisations.
but it's nice because he comes in and he's just like, you know what, I don't know anything about theatre, but it's all about sticking together. We're all here as one. We're good companions, as they then call their troupe in the end. And it's just getting that feeling across that no matter what situation you put it in, the idea that no matter how crazy life gets, no matter how much you want to break away from people, we are all in this together. And that is not quoting High School Musical, but it is that feeling. And I think that's why the piece works so beautifully, because it remains grounded, it remains wholesome, but it's jolly good fun as well.
Now, because your character is if you like, the song and dance man in the troupe, is he not?
Yeah, I played Jerry Jerningham, who is arguably the slightly camper one out of the bunch. Questionable, is he in the closet or not? But he's the common guy that likes to present himself as posh and upper class, to the point where everything he says is way too overdone. So it just sounds ridiculous. And it was nice because the script that Ron Harwood wrote.
Yes, it's Ronald Harwood wrote the book. The book of the musical. The libretto, I suppose I should say.
Yes. And there's moments where some of my lines will be really spread out and written in the way that he'd like me to obviously say them. Like one of my lines, "Lady Partlet, what a surprise," instead of surprise. I mean, other lines weren't, so that, I mean, as an actor, that kind of confused me. I was like, what lines am I doing? Am I supposed to be a certain way for some lines or not? But clearly not. In the book, I think J.B. Priestley really goes to town, and it's very complicated to read, actually, because you've got your Yorkshire Jess, and everything's written in Yorkshire.
It's in his dialect, isn't it?
Yeah, and then obviously you got my character who's really over the top with these different things, so it's quite complicated to get your head around. But when you get used to it, it's a fantastic novel. But my character was just, I feel he was one of the harder ones to get, because I didn't quite know where he was going to sit, and especially for a radio broadcast, it was, they're not going to see the physical side of things. Our little audience that we had, thankfully, on the Thursday and Friday evening performance, they could see the things I was doing physically, but as for the radio, to try and get that across, it was a really difficult challenge.
Well, I've read a review from someone who was actually there and saw you live and described you as a revelation.
Well, that's... I just think they went to the pub before they saw the show, personally. But I think it's very flattering.
Musical talk. Stuart Matthew Price there, one of those people I always enjoy speaking to. And there we were talking about the good companions. Another person who it's always a joy to talk to, of course, is Tim Saywood. And it would be impossible for us to mark 10 years of musical talk without mentioning him. He and I saw the European premiere of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Allegro at the Southwark Playhouse only a couple of months ago, and had an in-depth conversation about its strengths and its weaknesses, which I'm eager to be able to broadcast to you all in the next year of musical talk. So, to whet your appetites, let's hear a little bit of Tim and I talking about Allegro. Musical talk.
It's a little bit epic, if you know, in that sort of Brechtian sense.
Well, it's certainly trying to draw the idea of learning macro lessons from micro experiences, isn't it? I think that's the way. I think you can draw universal truths. It's trying to say. From the individual experiences of one man. Whether that's true, well, in fact, I can say I don't think it is true, because I don't think the life of Joe Taylor Jr. does speak to me as another man.
Right.
But we can talk about whether it's artistically success later on.
I mean, obviously it starts from his very early childhood, and that's where you get a lot
his
of
birth.
These experiences of literally learning to walk, which is a central metaphor in the whole thing by the time you get to the second act, is obviously a very nearly universal experience. And so I think it really cast its net very wide in terms of sort of the audience getting the character experiences and perhaps being slightly more likely to invest emotionally. Slightly different to walking around on a bright morning hymning the corn as high as an elephant's eye, or however they open Carousel, I forget now, or going to a fun fair. So
I hope I don't get beaten up by the man on the roundabout.
But literally one step, and then the other step we all get.
Well, you also spoke about being epic as well, because funny enough, apparently Oscar Hammerstein's, and he's the book writer here.
Yes.
He only wrote 2 books with Richard Rodgers. There's this and Me and Juliet, I think it is.
Right.
Neither of which have gone on to be the great successes of Rodgers and Hammerstein.
No.
But his original concept was actually to take someone from cradle to grave, all the way through an entire life, and it was only when they realised they just weren't going to get all of that in a coherent and cohesive way.
I think they could have flash-forwarded it at the end, but never mind.
Or frameworked it with him on his deathbed looking back.
Well, exactly. There's always a way.
But
Give
anyway,
me 5 minutes with that show, I could have sorted it out.
Well, if I could just squeeze in past your ego, I'll... But anyway, they decided that was too much, so they made it his first half of his life, if you like. So it's from his birth in 1905 and his first 35 years on this planet. The programme of the Southwark Playhouse version we saw, directed by Tom Sutherland, rather, I think, in a slightly underselling way, he says it's from birth to midlife crisis, whereas Stephen Sondheim, I think, has slightly more nicely said it's from birth to rebirth.
Yes, that's a good way.
Which I think is a much better way.
I was going to say sort of Renaissance, or exactly, which I suppose means rebirth. So there we are.
Yes.
Only more pretentious.
Well, I don't see why we should move from the theme we've been establishing.
No, that's kind of.
So that was the question about whether it's a concept. The initial point is, was it ahead of its time? The argument made is that the intention was always it was going to be massively, massively fluid. Well, I suppose there's some logistical things to talk about first as well. It's the first show that combined director and choreographer originally, when it was first on with Agnes DeMille, who'd done all the ballets in Oklahoma and
that's right.
their previous work. And Stephen Sondheim recalls that she wasn't very nice to the actors.
No, I've read that, yeah.
But also, she was a female director, which was an incredibly rare thing if it had happened at all on Broadway that early in the 40s. So there are lots of things like that, but that's logistical and not necessarily something the public would see, and certainly would not have difficulty in understanding. The concept is that the fluidity, they were trying to make the dance and the drama flow into one. So you get that with the music as well. Bits of songs come in and go out of again and then come back again later. I actually thought that one of my favourite songs in it, which is called You Were Never Away, which is a beautiful song by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein. I'm prepared to say that. I do like it a great deal. It sort of gets thrown away for there's a 50-second splattering of it in a sequence in a college, when we see Joey in college. And I thought, when that finished, I hope that wasn't it for that song, because that's a lovely song. And then it comes up about 28 times further along the line in Act 1 and in Act 2. So you had this fluidity which was then shown in the music, but you also had the fluidity on the stage. So you had the concertinaing of a life. That first act is actually, if he spends, say, 5 years in the town, and it's a 35-year life we're seeing, then he spends the first 30 years in Act 1 from birth and then learning to walk and then becoming a teenager. Well, you see him as a child, you see him as a teenager at college, and then you see him sort of marrying. That is a concertinaing of life, which we now understand very easily and can be shown very easily, but apparently was quite a difficult thing to show. So they tried to develop what we would now think of as cinematic techniques in theatre. So the way they originally did it, apparently, they divided a set into sort of smaller sets, and then they had an S-shaped curtain, which they would draw around it. So basically your eye was drawn like a wipe, as we would say if you were watching it on the screen, from one section to the next, and so that section was covered up so it could be prepared for the next scene, and we'd be looking at this and then it would sweep back immediately, and the actors would go back and forth. probably the easiest analogy that we can understand, therefore, is live television. Not that anyone uses that anymore.
Yeah.
Where you're running from one bit of the stage to another.
Well, of course, that's just come back in a big way, especially for musicals. But,
well, it has indeed on the television, quite.
So people probably can appreciate that now. That's very interesting that technique was there, and I suppose it's certainly true. You do trace people, I suppose, in Oklahoma, and I'm just using those as the immediate antecedents, and in Carousel. Well, Oklahoma, you don't really trace people through a very long period of time, do you?
No.
But in Carousel, several years certainly. But yeah, you're right. We don't have the very beginnings and that sort of length of that time scale.
Was it successful in doing that for your modern eyes? Because we're so used to cinematic techniques on stage, in the cinema, and indeed on television. It's everywhere now.
It certainly didn't jar with me. I mean, obviously
nor
there
I.
were like strong montage elements to it, and it was absolutely fine. I've actually just thought of another way in which I suppose you could argue it's ahead of its time, or certainly ahead of its time in musical theatre, which is always to say 20 years
behind everything else.
Behind everything else
in drama. Yeah.
But of course, a feature I picked out of Oklahoma and Carousel was that, and again of Rodgers and Hammerstein in general, is there's a guy and a girl, and they get together and they live happily ever after, and it don't happen here.
It didn't happen in Carousel either, did it?
Well, not exactly.
He
but
beats her up and he dies. I know it's every girl's dream, but
well, no, all right, but on the other hand, there isn't then another.
Yes, that's true.
Girl for that guy. Well, obviously not in his case, but there isn't also another guy for that girl. Here we work through two. Let's see, how many relationships? Yeah, we've got the one at college.
Well, is that a relationship?
Well,
you're talking about Jenny, aren't you? His childhood sweetheart, who's painted up as being a bit of a bad one, really. But
she certainly progresses significantly through the.
That's true. Yeah. She's quite manipulative all the way through, though, even from the earliest time when she's writing him letters at college. You're right, but there's the woman who sings "So Far," which is a lovely song.
Yes.
And just taking us on a sidestep, the verse and the chorus are the interesting things there. The verse sounds like Rodgers and Hart.
Yeah.
The chorus sounds like Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's a very odd combination. When you're listening to the first bit, you think, oh, we've gone back to the 1920s, 30s when Rodgers was writing that sprightly stuff he did with Lawrence Hart.
Right.
And then you get into the slightly more lush, slightly more, the obviously Hammersteinian aspects of it, and the slower Rodgers. Which is, we have no traditions, we have, we've got nothing to remember yet, so far.
Yes,
which is actually a really nice concept as a song. Musical talk. There we are, my good friend Tim Saywood, and we'll be talking about lots more in the next 12 months, including industrial musicals and the musical Floyd Collins, which was recently on in London at Wilton's Music Hall. And of course, there'll be plenty more besides, with Tim. But Tim's not the only person I enjoy sitting down with to have a really good in-depth analysis of a musical or two. There's also Dom McChesney. And so let's hear a little bit of a conversation I recorded with him about Florodora, the 1899 smash hit musical in both London and on Broadway, about which Musical Talk will be dedicating several episodes in the next few months. But in this conversation, we're talking about some of the shows which spoofed the success or the songs of that show, Florodora. And in particular, Noel Coward's 1960s musical, The Girl Who Came to Supper. Let's hear from Dom McChesney. Musical Talk. So tell me about this spoof. Now, you said it was in...
It's in the second act of The Girl Who Came to Supper. Do you know it?
It's the last score by Noel Coward, isn't it?
Yes.
After he'd done Sail Away.
That's right.
He then did The Girl Who Came to Supper. And the best song is the Cut Song, I think, isn't it? Which is the one where the King sings about other assassination attempts on his predecessors.
Unfortunately, it opened at the same time that Kennedy was assassinated.
And so that's cut for taste and decency.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And so that would have been 1970...
Long live the King if he can.
Ah, that's right, yes. Now, when was Kennedy assassinated?
63.
63. So I'm terrible with dates.
Sail Away is 61, so that would be about right. Yeah.
Yes. I've never seen it. I know the cast recording. It's Florence Henderson and...
Jose
Ferrer, yes. And Tessie O'Shea.
Oh, now she sings my favourite mock musical song, which is What Ho, Mrs. Brisket.
Which is from the show.
It is, indeed.
Yes,
that's right,
it is, yes.
Because she sings all these... she's there as a kind of Cockney Sparrow.
Yes, absolutely.
And she sings all these, but they're good because everyone forgets, of course, Noel Coward was sort of born in Teddington here in West London.
Everybody thinks he's Toby Toby, but
Yes.
really he wasn't.
Yes, he was
so
good.
it was covered all the classes, really.
And he would have seen music hall in its last iteration before it became variety. So
Yes.
yes, he would have certainly have
Yeah.
known that kind of thing. But What Oh Mrs. Brisket I love, because I can almost hear, funnily enough, I can almost hear George Formby singing. Do you know What Oh Mrs.
yes.
Brisket? Why not take a chance and risk it?
That's right.
You'll
Come
have
take
a-
a dab in the...
You'll have a lot of fun amongst the shrimps and dabs. Oh, I can't remember it. No, well, the
Something-
thing I remember is at the end is if a saucy old shark for a lark wants to nibble at your chocolate biscuit, run for the shore and the crowd will roar. What oh, Mrs. Brisket. That's how I remember it. But it feels like you could have a sing along.
Yes. But it absolutely creates what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
And in fact, the spoof of Florodora happens just after that, I believe.
Oh, really?
Because that is a moment where the young prince and the main female character, I don't know the name, they go off into London and they get entertained by this Cockney extravaganza. And
they have a night in the courts, don't they?
Indeed, with the pearly king and queen doing their knees up.
For export,
Yeah,
clearly.
yes. And then just after that, I believe that he's asking her about the show that she's in, which is called The Coconut Girl. And she does I think it must be nearly about 10 minutes. She does this musical number where she covers all the songs and she explains the entire story. So she starts off with the opening chorus, and she's one of the chorus girls. Cool girls.
Yes, it's just quite a different thing.
Quite a different thing. And
so it's like a Bacchus audition.
yes, indeed. And there's a number between the girls and the boys.
Oh well, yeah.
And she's explaining that. She then does a brilliant moment she talks about the third act of the show, where I love these kind of little clever musical
references.
Gags, but it's meant to be a octet sung by all these different girls, and they've all got different lines, and so she sings the song, which is we're six it's six, so we're six lilies of the valley, and then it goes to all the names, which is very typical of the operators of the time. Then she sings her part, which is the lowest line and the most, with no tune whatsoever, so it's all on one note, and she misses out everyone else's and she just sings her line. It's very, very funny, very clever.
Well, you're right, that's very definitely a spoof then of Florodora, because Florodora is set on an island where they use the amazing abundance of the flowers to make perfume. And they're all they're not all named after flowers, but there's a great deal of that going on. So he would have been too young. He would have seen the revival.
Right, but he would have been aware of it, because it would have certainly been in public consciousness at that point.
Well, it was
wouldn't
revived regularly until the 1930s in the West End.
Right.
1931 is the last big revival.
Okay.
Then it carried on tour until the 50s.
Really?
In this country, yeah. The last major revival in America was in the 20s and
Right.
carried on tour afterwards.
Yes.
So, for 20, 30 years, it was ubiquitous, really.
Right, yes.
But I think it was spoofed, well, I know for a fact it was spoofed in other shows, because there's a song called Tell Me Handsome Stranger.
From Little Mary Sunshine.
That's right, which presumably is a kind of retrospective satire or spoof of those sort of George Edwards turn of the century musicals, which were so popular in Britain and go over to America.
Well, it's very much a spoof of Rosemary.
It's a semi-opera.
So yes, it is, and it absolutely references Rosemary with all the stout-hearted men and all the rest of it. Yes,
give me some men who are stout-hearted men, and I'll soon give you 10,000 more.
Yes,
I've heard
exactly.
Barbara Streisand sing that, and it has a very different tone when she
it
sings
does, doesn't it? It goes on in a completely different direction. But so they do the whole wonderful end of Act 1 choral going on for ages.
Actually, Gilbertian and Sullivan.
Yes, exactly, very much so. Regardless of whether people have heard of Florodora or not,
its tropes have survived.
They're absolutely the tropes have survived, because they're used. If they've never heard of Florodora but they've seen a Gilbert and Sullivan at any point in their life, they are going to be aware of it. I mean, and everything from the bridesmaids in Ruddy Gore and the villagers coming in and all the rest of it.
Musical Talk. And there we are, Don McChesney talking about The Girl Who Came to Supper, and by extension, the venerable hit Florodora. Well, that very nearly brings us to the end of this episode of Musical Talk. I do hope it's whetted your appetite for the year to come, and the variety of episodes that we're planning to bring you. From the most contemporary musical theatre going, shows which you can currently see, to shows going all the way back to the Victorian era. That's quite a spread. And given that Musical Talk is now 10 years old, we could call that middle-age spread. Or, as Frankie Howard would say, suit yourselves. So, let me leave you now with, first of all, my thanks to you for listening to Musical Talk either today or at any time in the last 10 years. It's been a real pleasure presenting these episodes for you, and I hope to continue to do so for some years yet. But also, I want to say, do join us again next week here on Musical Talk for our 500th episode. 10 years in the making, let's hope it's a good one. But to finish today's programme, we're going to end with a song. It's a song from Florodora called Tact, written not by Leslie Stewart but by Paul Rubens, who, if you like, was the secondary composer of songs on that show. It's sung by a character called Lady Holyrood, and in this performance that role is portrayed by Cynthia Knight, for a recording made by the Comic Opera Guild. My thanks go to Tom Pettiott, who's given us permission to be able to play this song, and can I suggest you have a look at their marvellous website, which is www.comicoperaguild.org. The song is called Tact, and it was originally made famous by a woman by the name of Ada Reeve, who was absolutely the toast of the West End at the end of the Victorian era and for some years afterwards. And, although I can't say anything yet, I am very much hoping we can do something to celebrate her remarkable life with a surprising survival in audio terms. Let's just see what happens on that. But for the time being, let me sign off today in the usual way. One word, it will suffice, and this is it. Goodbye.
There are people who have tried to be smart and dignified, but there's just one little thing that they have lacked. They have cash enough, maybe, and no end of pedigree, but they haven't got a penny's worth of tact. Now you wouldn't tell a lie, oh no, you'd rather die, for you're sure to be discovered before long. But if only tact you've got, you can do an awful lot, which before you might have thought was very wrong. Tact, tact, take it for a fact, just try it and you'll find it will marry up the act. Perhaps they told you in your youth that there's nothing like the truth, but it really can't compare it all with tact, tact, tact. No, it really can't compare it all with tact. The Academy of You, if you've nothing else to do, if you're really fond of art, of course you don't, then a pianist you know makes you promise you will go to his concert. If you're musical you won't. Then a gorgeous gown you buy whose price is much too high, well considering the gown is cut so low. For the lady of today hasn't got the heart they say, but she's got a neck and that she means to show. Tact, tact, take it for a fact, the dining dress with no support for roving eyes attract. If your costume at the ball's not material at all, it's enough to add some diamonds and tact, tact, tact. It's enough to add some diamonds and tact. Then at Goodwood you must stay, and roulette of course you play, for the evening otherwise would go too slow. But you needn't be upset when you find yourself in debt, if you cannot seem to pay you simply owe. Well, next day you're on the course and fever just one horse, so a friend you ask to place the bet for you. As a lady in the ring wouldn't be the proper thing, and besides you've lost your purse, you always do. Tact, tact, take it for a fact, the race is done and poorly runs the horse that you have backed. So you say, what have you done? I meant to back the horse that won. You can can do a lot of betting if you tact, tact, tact. You can do a lot of betting if you tact.
This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with the creators. And my thanks to Rick Gard and to Tom Pettiott for letting us play those two songs in this programme. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com. Or subscribe to us on iTunes. And follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't press the button. Would you mind saying that again?
I'm going to say the word Norman and Evans and Bradford and Alhambra, and that'll do, perhaps.
Blue and yellow curtains, yes.